The barbecue smoke drifted across the Whitmore family's perfectly manicured backyard as laughter echoed around the patio table. But the joke that came next would shatter my 7-year marriage and send me on a journey I never saw coming. When my sister-in-law casually suggested that my disappearance wouldn't matter to anyone, she had no idea she was about to get exactly what she wished for. If you want to hear how one cruel comment became the catalyst for the most empowering year of my life, make sure to subscribe for daily stories about finding your strength when the people closest to you show their true colors. The Whitmore family estate sprawled across 3 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, complete with a pool house, tennis court, and gardens that belonged in a magazine. Every summer they hosted their legendary 4th of July barbecue, an event that brought together 3 generations of Whitmores and their carefully curated social circle. I'm Claire Patterson, 34 years old, and I work as a freelance graphic designer. For 7 years, I'd been married to Marcus Whitmore, the middle child of this influential family. Marcus worked in the family's investment firm, a position that came with expectations, traditions, and a social hierarchy I'd never quite mastered. The Whitmores were old money, the kind of family that traced their lineage back to the Mayflower and had buildings named after them at Ivy League universities. They spoke in coded language about suitable people and appropriate behavior. And despite 7 years of marriage, I still felt like I was constantly being evaluated and found wanting. Marcus's mother, Eleanor, was the family matriarch, a woman who could make you feel unwelcome with nothing more than a perfectly timed pause in conversation. His father, Richard, was more approachable, but clearly deferred to Eleanor on all matters of family politics. And then there was Stephanie, Marcus's older sister, who had inherited Eleanor's talent for subtle cruelty wrapped in social pleasantries. Standing in their backyard that July evening, watching Marcus effortlessly navigate conversations with cousins and family friends, I felt that familiar knot of inadequacy forming in my stomach. I'd grown up in a middle-class family in Ohio. My father was a high school teacher, my mother a nurse. Good people, hardworking people, but not the kind of people who summered in the Hamptons or had trust funds. The evening started pleasantly enough. I'd spent the afternoon helping Eleanor arrange flowers and set up the buffet table, trying to be useful and earn some points in the ongoing campaign for family acceptance. Marcus had been attentive, introducing me to relatives I hadn't met and including me in conversations about the family business. But as the sun began to set and the wine flowed more freely, the family's true dynamics started to emerge. Eleanor began telling stories about Marcus's childhood, each anecdote carefully chosen to highlight the family's social connections and cultural sophistication. Stephanie chimed in with memories of exclusive schools and European vacations, painting a picture of a world I'd never been part of. "Claire, you're so quiet tonight," Stephanie said during a lull in conversation, her voice carrying that particular tone that made compliments sound like criticisms. "You must feel like you're listening to a foreign language when we talk about the old days." The comment drew chuckles from around the table, and I felt my cheeks burn. "Just enjoying listening to everyone's stories," I managed. "Oh, but you must have stories too," Eleanor said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Tell us about your family's traditions." It was a trap, and we all knew it. My family's traditions: backyard barbecues, with paper plates, camping trips instead of European vacations, Christmas mornings that focused on homemade gifts rather than expensive purchases, would only highlight how different I was from them. "We're pretty simple people," I said. "Nothing as elaborate as this." "Simple can be charming," Stephanie said, and the way she said simple made it sound like a character flaw. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture I'd once found comforting, but now recognized as pity. He knew what his family was doing, but he never stopped it. He never defended me or redirected the conversation. He just squeezed my hand and expected me to endure it. As the evening wore on, The conversation turned to a recent charity gala that several family members had attended. They discussed who had been there, what they'd worn, and which social connections had been made. I hadn't been invited. Charity galas weren't really my scene, Marcus had explained, and besides, the tickets were expensive. Claire, you would have loved the auction, Stephanie said, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. They had some beautiful artwork up for bid, right up your alley. It sounds wonderful, I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. Although, Stephanie continued swirling her wine glass thoughtfully, I suppose it doesn't really matter whether you're there or not. I mean, if you disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The words hung in the air like smoke from the barbecue, acrid and suffocating. Around the table there were a few uncomfortable chuckles, the kind of nervous laughter that accompanies a joke that's gone too far, but that no one wants to acknowledge. Marcus laughed too, not a big laugh, just a small chuckle that said he found his sister's observation mildly amusing rather than cruel. That laugh, that tiny thoughtless sound, hit me harder than Stephanie's words. Stephanie, Eleanor said mildly, that's not very nice. But she was smiling as she said it, the kind of smile that suggested the comment was inappropriate only in its directness, not in its sentiment. I sat there for a moment, feeling the weight of 7 years of similar moments. The subtle exclusions, the backhanded compliments, the constant message that I was tolerated rather than welcomed. And in that moment, I realized Stephanie was right. If I disappeared tomorrow, this family wouldn't notice. They might even be relieved. Excuse me, I said quietly, standing up from the table. I need to use the restroom. I walked into the house, past the family photos that chronicled generations of Whitmore achievements, past the expensive art and antique furniture that spoke of old money and older traditions. In the guest bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the gilt-framed mirror and saw a woman who had spent 7 years trying to shrink herself to fit into a space that was never meant for her. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I didn't go back to the patio. Instead, I went upstairs to the bedroom Marcus and I always used during family visits and began packing my things. My hands moved automatically, folding clothes and gathering toiletries, while my mind raced with the implications of what I was about to do. Marcus found me 20 minutes later, suitcase half packed on the bed. Claire, what are you doing? People are asking where you went. I'm leaving, Marcus. Leaving? What do you mean leaving? The party's not over. I turned to face my husband of 7 years, this man I'd loved and tried so hard to please, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. He wasn't cruel like Stephanie or calculating like Eleanor. He was just weak. Too weak to stand up for me, too comfortable with the status quo to rock the boat, too invested in his family's approval to risk defending his wife. I'm not talking about the party. I'm talking about this marriage, this family, this life, where I'm treated like an unwelcome guest in my own home. Claire, you're being dramatic. Stephanie was just joking around. You know how she is. Yes, I do know how she is. And I know how your mother is, and how your father is, and how you are when you're with them. I know that you all see me as some kind of charity case you've graciously allowed into your circle. That's not true. Marcus, you laughed. When your sister said no one would notice if I disappeared, you laughed. He had the grace to look ashamed, but it was too little too late. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. But you can't just leave because of one stupid comment. It's not one comment, it's 7 years of comments. 7 years of being made to feel like I don't belong, like I'm not good enough, like I should be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance you throw my way. I zipped up my suitcase and headed for the door. Marcus followed me, his voice rising with panic. Claire, please, let's talk about this. We can work through it. I'll talk to Stephanie. I'll make sure she apologizes. And then what? She'll find another way to remind me that I don't belong. Your mother will make another comment about my simple background. Your father will forget my name again at the next family gathering. And you'll stand there and let it happen, because keeping the peace is more important to you than protecting your wife. I paused at the top of the stairs, looking down at the foyer, where family photos smiled up at me, generations of Whitmores who had never included me and never would. Stephanie was right about one thing, Marcus. If I disappeared tomorrow, your family wouldn't notice. But here's what she got wrong. I would notice. I would finally be free. I drove through the night, stopping only for gas and coffee, until I reached Seattle. I'd always loved the Pacific Northwest, the mountains, the water, the sense of possibility that seemed to hang in the misty air. It felt like the perfect place to disappear and rebuild. I found a small studio apartment in Capitol Hill, nothing fancy but clean and bright, with a view of the Space Needle from the kitchen window. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by my own choices. Furniture I'd picked out, art I'd selected, colors that made me happy, rather than ones that fit someone else's aesthetic. The first few weeks were hard. I cried more than I care to admit, mourning not just my marriage, but the version of myself I'd lost somewhere along the way. I'd spent so many years trying to be what the Whitmores wanted that I'd forgotten who I actually was. But slowly, I began to remember. I started taking on freelance design projects, working with small businesses and nonprofits who appreciated my creativity and treated me as a valuable partner rather than a necessary evil. I joined a hiking group and discovered that I loved being outdoors, something I'd never had time for when my weekends were consumed with Whitmore family obligations. I made friends, real friends who liked me for who I was, rather than who I was married to. Sarah, a photographer who lived in my building, became my closest confidant. Tom, a writer I met at a coffee shop, became my hiking buddy, and eventually something more. These people knew nothing about my old life, my failed marriage, or my inadequacies as a Whitmore wife. To them, I was just Claire, funny, creative, adventurous Claire. 6 months after leaving Connecticut, I looked in the mirror and saw a different person. My hair was longer and lighter, sun-streaked from weekend hikes. My clothes were more colorful, more expressive. My eyes had a spark I'd forgotten existed. I was becoming myself again, maybe for the first time in my adult life. A year after that fateful barbecue, I received an email that made my heart skip a beat. A marketing firm in Seattle was looking for a graphic designer for a major campaign, and the client was Whitmore Investments. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. My first instinct was to decline the project. The last thing I wanted was to get pulled back into the Whitmore orbit. But as I read through the project details, I realized this was exactly the kind of high-profile work I'd been building toward. The campaign would showcase my skills to a national audience and could launch my career to the next level. More importantly, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. The woman who had fled that barbecue in tears was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more sure of her own worth. If I was going to face the Whitmores again, I would do it on my own terms. The presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the marketing firm's downtown offices. I spent the weekend preparing, crafting a campaign that was bold, innovative, and undeniably brilliant. I chose my outfit carefully, a tailored navy suit that projected confidence and success, paired with jewelry I'd bought for myself with my own money. Walking into that conference room, I felt like a different person than the one who had sat silently through years of family dinners. My portfolio was impressive, my ideas were sharp, and my presentation was flawless. I was no longer trying to fit into someone else's world, I was creating my own. The Whitmore delegation included Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus, along with their marketing director. I watched their faces as I walked into the room, saw the shock and confusion as they recognized me. Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost, while Eleanor's composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered her social mask. "Claire," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know you were in Seattle." "There's a lot you don't know about me," I replied calmly, setting up my presentation materials. "Shall we begin?" For the next hour, I presented the campaign I'd developed for their company. It was good better than good. It was the kind of work that would set them apart from their competitors and establish them as forward-thinking leaders in their industry. I watched as their initial shock gave way to professional interest, then genuine enthusiasm. Eleanor, who had never shown me anything but polite disdain, actually smiled when I explained the demographic targeting strategy. Richard nodded approvingly at the budget projections. Even Marcus seemed impressed, though he kept staring at me like he was trying to reconcile this confident professional with the woman he'd married. When I finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then Richard cleared his throat. "That was exceptional, Claire. Truly exceptional. I had no idea you had this level of expertise. There's a lot about me you never bothered to learn," I said, my voice pleasant but pointed. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "We'd like to move forward with this campaign. When could you start? I'll need to review the contract terms with my attorney, but assuming everything is acceptable, we could begin next week." My attorney. The words felt good in my mouth, a reminder of how far I'd come from the woman who used to apologize for taking up space. After the formal presentation ended, Marcus lingered while his parents and the marketing team discussed logistics. When we were alone, he approached me with the hesitant manner of someone walking through a minefield. "Claire, you look incredible, different, happy." "I am happy, Marcus, happier than I've been in years. I've been thinking about what you said that night, about how we treated you, how I treated you. You were right. I should have stood up for you. I should have protected you from my family's behavior." I studied his face, looking for signs of the man I'd once loved. He was there underneath the Whitmore polish and social conditioning, but he seemed smaller, somehow diminished. "Yes, you should have, but you didn't, and that tells me everything I need to know about who you are and what our marriage meant to you. Is there any chance? Could we try again? I could be different. I could stand up to them." For a moment I felt a flicker of the old sympathy, the old desire to make things easier for him. Then I remembered the woman I'd become, the life I'd built, the respect I'd earned. "Marcus, I don't need you to stand up to your family anymore. I don't need their approval or acceptance. I don't need to be part of a world that never wanted me in the first place. So that's it, 7 years of marriage and you're just done." I was done the night your sister said no one would notice if I disappeared, and you laughed. "I'm not angry anymore, Marcus. I'm grateful." She gave me the push I needed to find out who I really am. As I was packing up my materials preparing to leave, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Claire, could I speak with you for a moment?" I turned to find Stephanie standing in the doorway, looking uncomfortable and uncertain, expressions I'd never seen on her face before. "What can I do for you, Stephanie?" I need to apologize for what I said at the barbecue last year. It was cruel and unnecessary, and I've regretted it ever since. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but she seemed genuinely remorseful. "Why now? Why apologize after all this time?" "Because watching your presentation today, seeing who you've become, I realized I was wrong about you. I was wrong about a lot of things." She paused, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily. "I think I was threatened by you, if I'm being honest. You were different from us, and instead of appreciating that difference, I tried to make you feel bad about it. You succeeded. I know, and I'm sorry. You deserved better from all of us, but especially from me. I should have welcomed you into the family instead of making you feel like an outsider." I felt something shift inside me, a loosening of tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. This apology wouldn't change the past, but it provided a kind of closure I hadn't expected. "Thank you for saying that, Stephanie. It means more than you know." For what it's worth, Marcus has been miserable since you left. He talks about you constantly, about how he failed you. I think losing you was the wake-up call he needed about who he really is versus who he pretends to be. That's his journey to figure out. Mine led me here, and I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. 6 months later, the Whitmore campaign launched to national acclaim. The creative strategy I'd developed earned industry awards and brought my design firm more high-profile clients than I could handle. I hired 2 associates and moved into a larger office space with a view of Elliott Bay. The success felt different than anything I'd experienced before. It was mine, earned through my own talent and hard work, rather than reflected glory from someone else's achievements. When industry magazines featured my work, they spelled my name correctly and focused on my vision rather than my connections. Tom and I had grown closer, our relationship built on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than social expectations or family pressure. He loved my ambition, encouraged my creativity, and never once suggested that I should tone down my success to make him feel more comfortable. "You know what I love most about you," he said one evening as we watched the sunset from my apartment balcony. "My devastating wit and natural beauty." "Well, those too. But mostly I love that you know exactly who you are. You're not trying to be anyone else or fit into anyone else's idea of who you should be. You're just authentically you." It was the kind of compliment I'd never received in 7 years of marriage to Marcus, who had always seen me as a work in progress that needed improvement rather than a complete person worthy of love as I was. A year and a half after leaving Connecticut, I hosted my own barbecue in my Seattle backyard, a small space compared to the Whitmore estate, but filled with people who genuinely wanted to be there. Sarah brought her latest photography project to show everyone. Tom grilled vegetables alongside the burgers, accommodating our vegetarian friends without complaint. My hiking group friends shared stories of recent adventures and planned future trips. As I looked around at the faces gathered around my picnic table, people who knew my story, who celebrated my successes, who supported me through challenges, I realized I'd found something the Whitmores had never been able to give me. A family that chose me for who I was, rather than tolerating me for who I was married to. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw the article about your campaign in Adweek. Congratulations, you deserve all the success you're having." I showed the message to Tom, who raised his beer in a mock toast. "To your ex-husband's excellent taste in women and terrible judgment in letting you go." "I'll drink to that," I said, clinking my bottle against his. But the truth was, I was grateful Marcus had let me go. If he'd fought harder for our marriage, if his family had been kinder, if I'd felt more welcome in their world, I might never have discovered who I could become on my own. 2 years after Stephanie's cruel joke, I received an invitation to Marcus's second wedding. He was marrying someone from their social circle, a woman who would fit seamlessly into the Whitmore world in ways I never could. The invitation was addressed to Claire Patterson and guest. They'd remembered to use my maiden name, which I'd reclaimed along with my independence. I RSVP'd with my regrets and sent a generous wedding gift, a gesture that felt both gracious and final. Tom and I had plans that weekend anyway, a hiking trip to the Olympic Peninsula, where we'd explore trails I'd never known existed during my years as a Whitmore wife. "Do you ever regret it?" Tom asked as we sat by our campfire that Saturday night, the same night Marcus was dancing at his wedding reception. Leaving everything behind, starting over, I considered the question seriously, looking up at stars that were invisible in the light pollution of Connecticut's wealthy suburbs. I regret that it took me so long to realize I deserved better. I regret the years I spent trying to shrink myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. But leaving, starting over, finding out who I really am, I don't regret any of that. Even if it meant losing your marriage, especially because it meant losing my marriage. I wasn't losing love, Tom. I was losing the illusion of love. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. Real love celebrates who you are and encourages you to become even more yourself. He reached over and took my hand, calloused from our outdoor adventures, strong from the life I'd built with my own 2 hands. "For the record, I notice you. Every day I notice you. And if you disappeared tomorrow, it would leave a hole in the world that no one else could fill." 3 years after that fateful barbecue, I was featured on the cover of Pacific Northwest Business magazine as one of the region's rising stars in creative industries. The photo showed me in my office, surrounded by award-winning campaigns and successful projects, smiling with the confidence of someone who had found her place in the world. The article mentioned my background, briefly a failed marriage that led to a cross-country move and a career reinvention, but focused primarily on my professional achievements and future plans. I was no longer defined by what I'd left behind, but by what I'd built in its place. Stephanie sent me a congratulatory email when the article came out, a brief note that said simply, "I always knew you had it in you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." I appreciated the gesture, but her opinion no longer mattered to me the way it once had. The woman who had been devastated by her cruel joke was gone, replaced by someone who understood that other people's inability to see your worth says nothing about your actual value. That evening, Tom and I celebrated with dinner at our favorite restaurant, a small place in Fremont, where the owner knew our names and our usual orders. As we walked home through the neighborhood, I'd come to love past the quirky shops and friendly faces that made up my new world. I thought about the journey that had brought me here. Stephanie had been wrong about so many things that night, but she'd been right about one: I had disappeared. The woman who had sat silently through years of subtle humiliation, who had apologized for taking up space, who had tried to earn love by making herself smaller, that woman had vanished completely. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, more authentically herself than she'd ever been allowed to be. Someone who built her own success, chose her own family, and refused to accept anything less than genuine respect and affection. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't proving the Whitmores wrong about me. It was proving myself right about who I could become when I stopped trying to be who they wanted me to be. I had disappeared, just as Stephanie had suggested. But what emerged from that disappearance was a woman worth noticing, worth celebrating, worth loving exactly as she was. And that woman would never disappear again. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding your strength when the people closest to you show their true colors, and discovering that sometimes the best thing you can do is disappear from the wrong life to appear in the right one. New inspiring stories every day that'll remind you that your worth isn't determined by other people's ability to see it.